of Color, day 2 of some amazing presentations. We just had Dr. Christina give us on self-care and why it's important. And now we have Dr. Green-Lee talking about ethical decision-making. So I'm gonna turn it over to her. Also, I'm gonna mute everyone. So if you have any questions or comments, throw them in the chat. And then once the presentation's over, I'll unmute you to do any kind of speaking. Hey, Londa. All right.
Okay, good morning, everyone. Again, my name is Christina Green, and I am a school counselor in the School District of Philadelphia, and I'm very honored to present for one of the first conference for professional school counselors of color. So today we are going to discuss School Counselor's Guide to Ethical Decision Making. And I would like for this to be interactive. This is going to be my first virtual conference presentation. And the original was interactive, involved some handouts and things like that. So as different questions are posed throughout the presentation, feel free to use the chat to provide input as if we were having a discussion face-to-face. And thank you so much for joining my presentation today. So I first want to start off by quoting some experts within the field of ethics. Counselors are often faced with situations that require sound ethical decision-making ability. Determining the appropriate course to take when faced with a difficult ethical dilemma can be a challenge. So we're going to discuss these matters, and hopefully it won't be so challenging when you encounter your next ethical decision after this presentation. So let's first start off by talking about exactly what are ethics. So ethics involves a coherent and uniform set of rules or principles that people ought to live or practice a profession. Ethics deals with the right choices of conducting, considering all of the circumstances. It also deals with the distinction between what is considered right and what is considered wrong within a given culture. And it is also the science of morals. So what principles do we abide by as humans within our society and also within our profession? So within our field of school counseling and counseling, who typically discusses ethics? So we have the American Counseling Association, American School Counselors Association, and also our state licensing board. So the presentation today is going to surround these 3 entities. So I have Pennsylvania State Board of Social Work, Marriage, and Family Therapists and Professional Counselors because I'm in Pennsylvania, and I'm pretty much just using this as an example. So let's look at these 3 entities' recommendations on ethical training. So in my state, if you are a licensed professional counselor, they require you to receive 3 hours of ethics training every 2 years. So that's pretty specific and spelled out. So if we look at what ASCA is recommending that we do, they are essentially saying that you need to regularly attend some type of training on legal and ethical responsibilities. And they also go on to explain that professional development around these areas should also occur. And that can include attending conferences, reading journal articles, and then also the trainings. So let's see what ACA says. So they state that it is important for counselors to engage in ongoing professional development regarding current topics in ethical and legal issues. Do you know what your state licensing board's requirements are for ethics training? And that's something that you can now take the time in the chat if you are aware. You can even say, I don't even know, I need to, research it. But it would be a good thing for you to know that information, even if you are not licensed. I think it's just important to know information about our larger profession in general. So let's do a little reflection based on what ASCA is asking for us to do. When was the last time you attended a conference? Well, you're all here today, so right now. But you can reflect, when was the last conference you attended prior to this one? What was the last journal article you read pertaining to counseling issues? Do you regularly attend trainings on legal and ethical responsibilities of counselors? And have you encountered an ethical dilemma as a school counselor? So, even if your first three answers were, it's been a while, I haven't read anything, I just don't have time, my caseload is, we have a lot of things that are going on. However, the last question, I'm sure we can all think about an ethical dilemma that we experience as school counselors. And even if we are fortunate enough to say, I have never encountered one, I think that we are probably going to be in for a surprise whenever we end up back brick and mortar, just with all of the things that are happening in our society today. So really, it's not if a counselor will face an ethical dilemma, it's when. So try to get yourself prepared. And that's what I'm hoping that we can do today through this presentation. So let's think a little bit about resources that we use in order to make ethical decisions. So the first thing that we should consider is the law. So some of the laws that we're referring to here are FERPA, IDEA, and also state laws, which there's some variations within state laws. ACA and ASCA's Code of Ethics help us to make our decisions. Through consultation, this is something that you should do throughout your role of a school counselor. If it's talking to those within your profession, within your building, within the school district, or even if it's like a lifeline. I know I consult heavily with former colleagues that are outside of my district, and I actually like that because they have a different view on situations outside of the district. Also, supervision. There's nothing wrong with continuing supervision, even if you are licensed, even if there is no need for you to be supervised towards any type of advanced degree or requirement related to work. Supervision can really help with everything that we are dealing with within our profession and within our careers. Also, we can use the ASCA position statements. I absolutely love the position statements. I think throughout a lot of these presentations, we have acknowledged that there is some room to grow within ASCA, and there's nothing wrong with that. But for what does exist right now, I feel that they are very helpful in supporting different things that we might encounter as school counselors, even surrounding issues of ethics. Also, our prior experiences and trainings will help us to determine what decisions to make when we are encountered with an ethical dilemma. And ethical decision-making models as well help us. Are there any others? And I'm just gonna pause here for a moment if anyone wants to add anything in the chat. I see somebody mentioned about doing better with reading up on ethical responsibilities of counselors. I would definitely agree with that. For myself, personally, it's just something that, I hear about a case or I hear about a situation or even what's going on in the news, and I try to use this point of reference as a counselor, you know, how would I address this, or how does whatever is going on potentially affect my role? Always trying to process that information, and I feel like I can never read enough. Okay, let's see. Any other resources that we use in order to address ethical decisions? Okay. Yes, there we go. District policy. Ding, 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 ding. Very important. So, your district policy, and also if you have a union, what your contract might say. That is something that can also impact ethical decision making as well. And it is okay to have education code. Okay, Brittany, if maybe you could give me a little more there. I don't think I'm quite understanding that one. I'm going to move on and I'm going to look back at that. Okay, so ethical decision-making models. Okay, I see, Brittany, the education code of the state. Yes, so state codes and the law, yes, that is also important. So you want to take all of those things in consideration. So when we're talking about ethical decision-making models, first, the models offer us a clear framework for addressing ethical dilemmas. So I am a fan of models, the ASCA model, ethical decision-making models. It's just nice to have a framework that people to say, this is what I am working on in order to implement my program, or to come up with this decision, or to educate my students around career. So it's always good to reference a model. And models are often in the professional literature, and they are respected within academia. Multiple models also exist in regard to ethical decision making across multiple professions. So I can actually recall in an advanced ethics course that I took, we evaluated ethical decision making for insurance, like car insurance, those that are in the insurance business. And I thought it was really interesting because I never thought about that other professions might have ethical dilemmas and what they might do. I was looking at a very narrow view and just what those of us in the helping profession might encounter. So ASCA, within our ethical guidelines, recommend that we use the solution to ethical problems in schools, the STEPS model. ASCA endorses an ethical decision-making model that is outlined in the Practitioner's Guide to Ethical Decision-Making. However, at the same time, ASCA says that there is not a specific ethical decision-making model that is always most effective. So counselors are expected to use a credible model of decision-making that can bear public scrutiny of its application. So this is where it's important to utilize something that is within the literature that you can always reference to refer to. So on the next two bullets, I talk a little bit about the difference between ASCA versus ACA's ethical decision-making models. And it is absolutely up to you. You are a counselor, you are a school counselor, what ethical decision-making model you plan to use. But I think it's important to acknowledge that one of the differences is ASCA's model is specific to minors. So it's very specific to the age group that we would work with. Pre-K in some states all the way up to 12, K to 12, PK to 12 plus. ASCA kind of covers the gamut. ACA does not necessarily specify guidelines related to age. However, they do encourage the counselor to consider the worldview of their clients. And I think that's important when we're talking about worldview, more from a cultural perspective, and just where is your client coming from? So even when we're talking about someone's worldview, we can talk about age, somebody's chronological age, as well as their cognitive um, ability in trying to resolve ethical dilemmas. Okay, so for today, I'm going to cover ASCA's STEPS model. And here are all of the steps of the model. First, you're going to define the problem. You want to do it emotionally as well as intellectually. And I'm going to go into a little bit more detail about these steps in a few moments. The second step is you're going to apply ethical codes and the law. You're going to consider the student's chronological age as well as their developmental levels. Please keep in mind, just because a student has a chronological age, it does not mean that that is within their developmental functioning. So that is something that you do need to take into consideration. Number 4, you want to consider the setting. What are the parental rights and the minor's rights? Number 5, you want to apply moral principles. Next, you want to determine the potential courses of actions and their consequence. So you're really going to take a look at, well, if I act in this way, what might that look like for everyone involved, including myself? And you just want to process depending upon any action you are considering. Number 7, you want to evaluate the selected action. Next, you want to consult, you want to talk to someone. You know, I'm dealing with this ethical dilemma. This is what I'm thinking. You want to bounce the idea off of somebody. You do not, in best practice, want to address an ethical dilemma in isolation. Now, are we always given best practice? Do we always have someone we can consult with? We do not. However, that is best practice. And then the last step, you're going to implement the course of action. So one recommendation I'm going to make is when you are encountering an ethical dilemma and you are in a place where it is very important for you to document what is going on and why you decided to act in a certain way, to literally take these 9 steps, put them on some type of worksheet and answer each question. Stick it in the child's file, keep it in your quote unquote personal notes. So if anything happens, like if you ever get subpoenaed or somebody is coming back 2 years later and asking you why you chose a particular course of action, the fact that you utilize a model to help you solve this ethical dilemma is very important, and it is something that is recommended within our profession. So if you can explain the steps that you took, this will help you if you are encountering any backlash based on the actions that you made, because you have it documented and there was a chain that you actually followed that came up with your number 9, implementation of a course of action. So this is the part of the presentation where you are probably going to think, oh my gosh, there's so much on one slide. And essentially, this is the handout that I would be referring to if we were doing this face-to-face. So this just gives a little bit more detail about each step of the model. I'm not going to read it verbatim, but it is here for you to take a look at. So I'm going to just point out some very important aspects that are in the handout. So the first step we already talked about is defining the problem emotionally as well as intellectually. So this is essentially where you want to process this ethical dilemma. And you want to process the ethical dilemma not only intellectually as Dr. So and so, counselor so and so, Mr. So and so, you as a professional. Okay. So when we're saying intellectually, that's the person that we want to process. Okay. However, before you're going to process it as professional counselor, amazing in my school district, you want to process this ethical dilemma emotionally. And you want to be very honest to yourself. So when you are dealing with an ethical dilemma, I'm going to give an example of some type of an abuse a child is experiencing, um, you know, and a huge age gap in what's going on with the child. You really want to just think emotionally, like, you know what, this person that did this to this child is a piece of crap. Emotionally, what are your emotions? I'm mad, I'm angry, I can't believe this is happening. You just want to process, get all those emotions out. And then once you've kind of unpacked that, then you want to think about intellectually, like, you know, what's best practice. And you just want to kind of get all your thoughts out there. This is kind of like note taking part of the ethical dilemma process. So next, you want to do apply the code of ethics and the law. I personally like to read Pennsylvania's code. That's what we call our laws in the state of Pennsylvania. From time to time, I will just do a little search. I'll check to see if any laws have changed from any of my training that I've attended. And I think it's important for you to get familiar with the law on that level where you're really dissecting and trying to understand it yourself. And also, no matter how familiar you think you are with ethical codes, it is important for you to go back and to read them because they are so layered that you might forget something, and there's nothing wrong with a brush up. So considering the students' chronological and developmental levels, we talked a little bit about that. Um, Thank you so much. I'm seeing in the chat. Whoops. I'm seeing in the chat. Uh-oh. This is not working out. I'm seeing in the chat that somebody mentioned about the developmental levels. Yes, that is very important. I can think of a situation where I had an 8th grader that engaged in exposing himself to a 1st grader, and I really had to remind the folks in my building that even though this child was chronologically the age of an 8th grader, his functioning level was that of a kindergartner. So we really had to take that in consideration in processing the situation and how to best support the student. So that is something that you definitely want to think about. You want to consider the setting, the parental rights, and also the rights of the minor. You want to think about how will the parent respond to this? They are part of the child's life. What are the consequences, for the child, for the parent involved in this situation? Okay, is the child out of immediate danger? Or is there immediate danger? You want to consider all of these aspects. Okay, so this is also where FERPA is also very important, and what the parent needs to know, and confidentiality and everything along those lines. So you want to apply the moral principles of Kitchener. So this next slide, I'm actually going to speak a little bit about that because it's probably been a while for a lot of us to have received any type of training around. Let me see. Why can I see this one? Okay. So this PowerPoint is going to be available to all of you. I do believe I'm not going to go through all of the moral principles, but this is just a little brush up just to remind you about these principles. It's probably been a very long time since some of us have seen them. Probably have to go all the way back to undergrad, which is probably more years for some than others. But these are all the aspects that we're talking about when we're talking about morals. So step 6 of the decision-making model, you want to determine the potential course of action and their consequences. So this is where you can literally fold the paper in, 3 or 4 sections, and you want to do kind of like a pros and cons list of, okay, well, if I do this, what are the potential consequences? Okay, well, maybe if I take this action, what could potentially happen? And you just want to be prepared for whatever might come. Ethical decisions don't always come very neat in a bow. They're dilemmas for a reason. And a lot of times, there's not going to be a win-win situation. Someone might end up in a lose type of situation. Compromise might not be something that can always be done. So you just want to process all of the potential steps and the consequences that might come from following a particular course of action. Then next, you want to evaluate the action, okay? And then consult. Talk about what is happening and what your decisions are with someone within the field that also upholds and understands confidentiality. So even though you're not necessarily talking about the student utilizing identifiable information, it is important for the person that you're consulting with to have an understanding of confidentiality, understand the limits of confidentiality. You definitely don't want to talk to someone and think that they're going to then share that sensitive information with someone else. And I also want to take the time to kind of expand a little bit on number 8 in consulting and confidentiality. We have a duty as school counselors that anyone that is involved in our program, so let's say we are fortunate enough to have an administrative assistant, a secretary that works within our counseling suite or our counseling department. It is our responsibility to make sure that they understand what confidentiality is. So if you are talking to them for some reason related to coming up with a resolution to an ethical dilemma, and even if their training does not necessarily talk about confidentiality, it is our duty to talk to them about, this information cannot be shared. So we'll talk a little bit more about that later in the presentation. And then number 9, you want to implement your course of action. And you also want to record it, like I said, to take a worksheet, come up with these 9 steps, and to just jot down what you did as a school counselor. And it does not need to be detailed where somebody can pull the sheet and read every single step you took, but something that is familiar for you to come back to if it's another year, 2 years, 3 years down the road, where you can say, you know what, now I understand why I made that particular decision. This is how I felt when I first encountered this particular dilemma, and to be able to process everything. Okay, so some additional considerations when we're talking about ethics. So the ACA Code of Ethics in their I.1.c. So we want to talk about conflicts between ethics and laws. So if ethical responsibilities conflict with the law, regulations, and/or other governing legal authority, counselors are to make known their commitment to the ACA Code of Ethics and take steps to resolve the conflict. If the conflict cannot be resolved using this approach, counselors acting in the best interest of the client may adhere to the requirements of the law, regulations, and or other governing legal authority. So there are going to be times where what we should do ethically and what the law says do not are not parallel. So we really have to sit down and process this. So the ACA code is essentially saying that you follow the law while acknowledging the ACA Code of Ethics and essentially the limitations to the applying the ethical code to this particular dilemma. And this is also something important for you to jot notes down, to be able to say, I might have acted outside of best practice, and this is the reason why, because the law said this. And hopefully we are all fortunate enough to have a lawyer, a solicitor, someone within our school organization that we can refer to if there is a dilemma along these lines. That is best practice. However, also at the same time, sometimes a dilemma is very time sensitive, so you might not be able to get a response as quickly as needed. So it is important for you to jot down why you took one path versus another. So how should conflicts between administrative directives and ethical legal issues be handled? So this is a moment for you to go into the chat and to let me know if you are sitting in your building and you are encountering an ethical dilemma and the members of your leadership team are privy to certain elements of the ethical dilemma, and you know what you should do, or you've processed what you should do ethically and legally, and you know what you should do, and you have this plan all spelled out, and now your principal comes and tells you you need to do something else. What should you do? I'll give you a moment to give a little feedback in the chat. I see here somebody saying to go with the law. What does the law say? Okay. You can't go to jail over your boss. I would definitely agree with that. I'm gonna play the flip side of the coin and say, what if your boss is now saying that they're going to write you up, or there's going to be some type of a consequence that's going to put your job in jeopardy? So what can you do in situations like this? Who can you go to? Who could support you? You can go to the higher ups within the district. Okay, that is definitely something you can do. Get support from your counseling director if you're fortunate enough to have someone. Absolutely, that's someone that can back you. Your union rep, your union. There you go. That is what I was thinking. And another recommendation is to go to HR. These are all great recommendations in order to address the fact that what you know is right legally and ethically as a school counselor, or best practice. Our principals are not always on the same page as what we do as school counselors. They don't necessarily understand us. A lot of times I feel like as school counselors, we are kind of like an island of one in our building. For those of us that are fortunate enough to be in a building with other school counselors, it might be, an island of 2, 3, 4. But we have this very specialized role within the building that a lot of times others do not necessarily understand. And even if we try to explain it to someone in the moment, ethical dilemmas, there are a lot of emotions that are involved. Sometimes it can be very hard, but our union other administrators, our counseling directors, they can all support us in these types of situations. Okay, so you also want to consider malpractice insurance. Some professional organizations provide limited insurance as part of the membership benefits. I am an advocate for carrying malpractice insurance. Get insurance. So what I have heard when I'm doing this presentation live is, oh, well, my district, won't their insurance cover me if something happens? To an extent. However, a parent, guardian, other entities can name you specifically in a lawsuit. So, for you to invest $130 a year towards malpractice insurance, for you to have that peace of mind that you have this additional support that is not entangled with the district and all the policies and what an admin might say about you and what this individual might say about you, for you to have a malpractice company that is supporting you is very important. So when you do decide to get malpractice insurance, you can actually call and consult with them. That is something that I personally did when my school district closed for COVID-19. And there were a lot of ethical dilemmas that I felt that I was seeing, and I decided to consult. So this is very important. So we were in COVID-19, closures of schools, remote. I personally have never experienced anything like that. Now, some colleagues across the world might have encountered situations where there was some type of a disaster and their school had to close and they had to come up with alternative forms of educating others. But for me, this was a first time. So even though I felt I knew best practice, I literally implemented the STEPS model, and I utilized step 8, which is consult. So even though I thought I knew the answer to ethical dilemmas that were popping up due to now being a remote school counselor, I still reached out to my malpractice insurance and I bounced it off one of the lawyers. I said, hey, I am doing what my profession tells me I should do in an ethical dilemma, and that is to consult. This is what I'm thinking. Can you tell me what your thoughts are as a lawyer? And they provided me what their thoughts were, and I have it documented, and I just moved on with what I needed to do as a school counselor. So consulting isn't always about you not knowing how to handle an ethical dilemma. It's just about what our ethical code tells us to do, and that is to consult. So your malpractice insurance can be very instrumental in just helping you to reach out to someone else that's not involved in your school district to find out if you're making good decision making. Okay, so we're going to move on. So here are some additional tips when it comes to ethics for school counselors. So you always want to act in the best interest of the students.
Hey, Dr. Green.
Okay.
This is Carletta.
Yes.
Are you sharing your screen? Because my name is up right now.
Uh-oh. Hold on. I thought it was.
I was like, maybe it's me. All right.
How far back do I need to go? Maybe this slide. Even further back.
I think this is it. Get right here.
This is it. Okay. All right. So I kind of talked about all these steps. I was referring to number 8, which is consult. These were the additional considerations. So the ACA Code of Ethics, and when there's a dilemma between the ethics and the law, we talked about how to address conflicts between administrators and what we should do ethically and legally, and the malpractice insurance. So now here we are, ethical tips for school counselors. Thank you so much for bringing that to my attention.
No problem. I saw my name and I was like, wait a minute, what is that? And I want to wait and listen. It's okay. That's not.
Okay, so here we go. We want to act in the best interest of the student at all times. We want to inform students of possible limitations prior to the start of the counseling relationship. So I personally like to hold, like kind of push into a town hall meeting or push into teachers' classrooms, just introduce myself, you know, talk to the students about how they can access me. And I also go over the limits of confidentiality and really get the students to interact with that particular aspect of the conversation, and to let them know, if you do come into my office, you know, and you're letting me know that someone is hurting you, you know, I'm not going to run all around and tell everybody in the building that, you know, someone is hurting you. However, I might need to reach out to someone and have a conversation about how I can best protect you. So I do not feel, granted, I'm not in all my students' heads, but I do not feel that having that discussion with the students is going to deter them for coming to you if they really need the help. But it's going to explain to them what those limits are. And, you know, we're all professionals, and I have faith that you could find a way to make sure you're talking about the limits of confidentiality with the students, however, still encouraging them to seek you out as a support when necessary. So, additional ethical tips, you want to increase awareness of your personal values, attitudes, and beliefs. There has been a lot of discussion within our group, Professional School Counselors of Color, and us interacting with other groups, and there being a lot of conflict in how, you know, we are trying to provide our worldview as people of color, and others that are not, that do not have the same worldview, that a lot of times there's a conflict. And this is one of the areas that I always refer to. It is our ethical duty to be aware of our personal values, our attitudes, and our beliefs, and how that might hinder our effectiveness as school counselors. So, ethically, we have a duty. And if we know that we have these personal values and there's some type of conflict, and we're not doing what is in the best interest of our students, that's a problem. So even if it's referring it to another counselor to support, or just better educating yourself, you might have, you know, these personal values, but you as a professional have a duty to students first. So number 4, you want to attempt to understand the diverse cultural backgrounds of your students, okay? And that is all aspects of culture. We're not just talking about race and ethnicity. We're talking about culture in a broader sense. Number 5, you want to function within the boundaries of your competency and skills. So if there is something that is outside of your skill set and outside of an area of your competency, this is very important. I moonlight from time to time as a community counselor. And I can remember early on moving into the Philadelphia area. I started my career in Lancaster. I'm originally from Montgomery County here in Pennsylvania. And restarted my career here in Philadelphia. So Philadelphia was a fairly new environment for me. And I remember doing some community counseling and being given certain cases that were way outside of my area of competence, and literally having to turn them down, but then also at the same time making sure that I was getting myself trained and familiar with whatever that skill set that I was that I wasn't knowledgeable on. So that's something that's very important for us to consider. So being able to fully explain why you did what you did, and this is where the documentation is important. And again, documentation for you, not that somebody can pull your notes and read verbatim and say, "Oh, now I understand." So number 7, you always want to encourage family involvement whenever possible and whenever appropriate when working with the minors involving sensitive areas that might be controversial. Of course, you don't want to pull a parent or guardian in, or a family member when they might be the perpetrator in a particular situation, or to kind of alert them of a situation. But when we're talking about whenever it is appropriate. So additional tips, you want to follow your job description, the work within your job description. So this is something that I have I've had to have conversations with teachers, people who might have training, they started off with a bachelor's in social work or psychology, and then they decided that they wanted to be a teacher, but they are not trained as a school counselor, but they feel because they've had a particular area of training that they can address a student's dilemma. They are working outside of their job description. It is also the same for school counselors. So for example, outside of my role as a school counselor, I do psychological evaluations. I cannot sit in my building as a school counselor and start diagnosing all of my students. That is outside of what my job description is in the School District of Philadelphia. So even though I have this skill set, it's not for me to use as a school counselor, because that's not what I'm doing in that particular setting. Does the fact that I have that skill set help support? Yes, but that is not where I am functioning. So that's something very important for you to acknowledge. I'm going to give you another example of number 8, and I don't want to keep going on and on and on here. But also, for example, if we have a student that has some type of a medical situation, I'm going to use diabetes as an example, or asthma, and we know someone intimately that has the same medical situation, we would not overstep the boundary of the medical professional, the nurse in the building, to make advisements. It's not appropriate. It's outside of our job description. We would still refer to the nurse in order to make sure that we ourselves are not creating an ethical dilemma by treating outside of our area of expertise. So you want to keep copies. Number 9, you want to keep copies of the ethical standards that you abide by close at hand, where you could just grab them and give somebody, or pull them up on your computer and give them to someone. Number 10, you would consult with colleagues, and we kind of talked about different entities that you can consult with within your district. Number 11, I feel very, very strongly about this. You need to join professional organizations and associations. This is very, very important. You want to keep up on what they are recommending, what literature are they putting out, if it's some type of a publication or article, or is it something that went around on social media. You want to make sure that you have a professional organization, that you are under that umbrella that you can reference. Number 12, you want to stay up to date with laws, any current court rulings. So there's a lot that's going on right now in our society. There's a lot that's going on in the United States. You want to find out what's going on, just so you kind of have this knowledge base, just in case there's some type of ethical dilemma that might come up pertaining to all of these laws that are popping up, or these roadblocks that we're encountering legally. Because, our schools are a microcosm of the larger society. So that's very important for us to do. And 13, consult with your school district's attorney if you are fortunate enough to have one, or seek other legal advisement prior to implementing any type of action related to ethical dilemmas. So I just wanted to throw this out. there for us to look at some of the ethical dilemmas that most school counselors experience. It's broken down based on the different level of schools. The first column there is elementary, and then second is middle, and then on to high school. So the most common ethical dilemma, and I want to kind of highlight this, a dual relationship with faculty. So I'm going to ask you to please put in the comments section how you as a school counselor might engage in a dual relationship with faculty. And I am sure that we are all, quote unquote, guilty of engaging in this type of relationship. I know I personally am. And I was very shocked when I did further research on this and said, oh my goodness, you know what? That is really considered to be a dual relationship. Having each other's phone number, oh man, did I regret the fact that at some point I gave some teachers my personal phone number during COVID closures. I was getting all types of text messages and phone calls, 10:30 at night when I'm dealing with my own stuff. But yes, that is considered to be a dual relationship. Hanging out after hours, happy hours, oh my goodness, all of that. People knowing where you live, being a neighbor with a teacher, all of these things are considered to be dual relationships. Now, Facebook friends, yes, they know all of your business. I am going to highly, this is a little outside the dual relationship with faculty, do not have parents or students on your personal social media pages. Do not post pictures of your students on your personal social media pages. You are looking at something to go down, and most likely your union is not going to support you. It is a no-no, and there are probably policies somewhere in your district about social media. If you have, so if you have students whose parents work in the school, and that's very wise for you not to have coworkers as your friends on Facebook. I am guilty of that. I do have some coworkers who are my Facebook friends. So, this is something to just be aware of. So how could a dual relationship with a faculty member really affect us? So, for example, when you get that phone call from that particular classroom, oh gosh, I love this teacher, you automatically pick up the phone. You might put whatever's going on in your office on hold. Then you get that phone call from the teacher that you don't care for as much. And you might not answer that phone call. So you've literally used your relationship that you have that is more favorable with one teacher, where you're providing them with a different level of care and service to support your students than you are another teacher that you might not care so much for. So that is an example. Or, now you're at happy hour and now you're talking about a student. That's not appropriate. It's not even, a confidential setting. Or you're giving more attention to a particular teacher's feedback about a student over another teacher. These are kind of those very gray areas where our dual relationships with faculty can really affect us. So writing recommendations, this is something that we are often asked to do as school counselors. That is an ethical dilemma. Cultural diversity, people just not really understanding culture. And again, I'm talking about in the broader sense. I'm not just talking about race and ethnicity, awareness of a colleague's ethical breach. So a lot of times we're aware that a colleague did something, however, we don't say anything. And again, this is very glaring right now in our society, where, people are now saying, well, I've heard conversations about a particular teacher and how they feel about a particular group of students, more specifically related to ethnicity and race. And they say some very harmful comments, but then you just kind of don't do anything about it. And, we have this duty where, again, always in the best interest of the student. So that's an example of another. And then you can see dual relationships with students. So the most challenging are the dual relationships with faculty, the recommendations. So you could see them there. Recommendation writing, dual relationships with students, peer helper programs. Okay, that can actually cause an ethical dilemma. Now students know sensitive information about other students, or you have a peer helping out. You have a student helping out in your office and they're seeing something about a peer, now that's created some type of ethical situation. Student confidentiality, and then also parent rights. I tell my coworkers the first day I will not be their friends on social media. That's good. And having to call DSS on faculty. I'm assuming DSS is the Department of Social Services. Yes. Okay. Yes, that is an ethical dilemma. Absolutely. Okay. So additional considerations. So when I have done this presentation within my school district, and we really are able to have more in-depth conversations around ethical dilemmas, because we're following the same, we're under the same state laws, we're under the same school district policies. We can really get into the nuts and bolts of ethical dilemmas. And I ask my colleagues to throw at me different ethical dilemmas that they've encountered that they would like for us to discuss and process in a large group. And what I actually find is about 50% of what counselors think are ethical dilemmas, in fact, are not ethical dilemmas. It's just someone being so set in their personal values that they are feeling that it is an ethical issue, when in fact it's a moral issue for them, or it's a belief issue for them. And that is not really a dilemma. That's more about you getting in tune with what limits you're putting on others based on you as a person, your worldview, your locus of control, and all of those areas. Okay, so there's a question. Is there an ethical issue if you are a school counselor but have an educational consulting business on the side? That's a really good one. So I am going to refer you to your state laws, what your school district says. So my particular school district, I'm going to use consulting business. For example, a licensed school counselor conducting supervision, and they are charging their colleagues in order to engage in that supervisory relationship. In my school district, in our contract, from what I understand, there is some type of a clause against that. So that can be that could potentially be an issue, or if your consulting business is within the school or the school district that you're servicing. So that is something that you might want to reach out to your malpractice insurance. Hopefully, if you do have some type of an educational consulting business, you do have some type of insurance that you would want to reach out to someone and just ask that question that is familiar with the laws in your state. Okay, so the next slide is the next few slides are just if we were together and we were processing these little case studies and ethical dilemmas that might present themselves. And I know we only have a minute left. A lot of times with these cases that I present, there's no right or wrong answer. It's best practice, and it's about explaining how you came up with the resolution or the solution to address the matter as you did. And again, I'm going to encourage taking those 9 steps from the STEPS model and to address every aspect of it in you coming up with a solution to an ethical dilemma. I'm just going to kind of go through the next few slides. I'll let you guys read them and become familiar with some possible ethical dilemmas, and also open it up for any questions.
Thank you. Anybody have any questions? I'm going to unmute everybody. So you're all unmuted. If you have anything to say. Angie put in the chat. You see the chat, Dr. Green?
What is an ethical dilemma to writing character references for students? So, one of the ethical dilemmas with that is, what if a student asks you for a character reference and based on what your experience with them, they don't have the best character? You know, now what are you going to do? Some other areas around that, and I'm going to let others chime in about any ethical dilemmas that they feel that writing some type of a reference. Okay, so somebody's saying you just tell them that you won't write it. So now here I am as a student, I'm asking you to write a letter of recommendation, and Rena, I'm not sure if you're just saying as a uniform, you know, I don't write any for any student and you're treating everyone the same. Okay. But if you're choosing not to write that student one, but you're willing to write another student one, and that student knows that you write character references or letters of recommendation, and now that child is experiencing some issue, the one that you said, I'm not writing you a letter of recommendation, that child is now experiencing some type of crisis and they feel that you don't support them, so therefore they're not coming to you. So that is an example of how that can kind of get twisted into a place where a student is feeling that you are not supportive of them and they're not seeking you out for a particular support or service. Okay, I am in elementary now, but the past in high schools, I would be as vague as possible and try to highlight the positive aspects. Okay, and again, there's no right or wrong answer to these. It is a dilemma, and it's about processing why you chose one path versus another. And also part of you processing that is, what types of consequences could come up as a result of my action. So it doesn't mean that you're not going to write them. It just means that it could potentially cause an ethical dilemma. Okay, let's see. Maybe inform the student that you're going to be honest about their behavior. And I know I've done that before. Our school district in Philadelphia, we go through, our 8th graders go through a school selection process where they have the ability to apply to different high schools. And when I first started off in the district, the letters of recommendation that were required for students to apply to different high schools, some school counselors are writing those letters of recommendation. Now we no longer do that. I'm going to hope that someone somewhere in our district building realized that it was some type of an ethical dilemma for school counselors to do that. But I kind of just had like this very uniform letter, and it wasn't the best letter of recommendation that I wrote, but sometimes I just also didn't know the students well enough. Kids want to run to you, oh, the counselor can write you a letter of recommendation, but you really don't know the child that well. So for me, I will try as much as possible to refer the child to a teacher that might be able to speak to their qualities a little better than what I'm able to do. And plus, kids present differently in your office than they do, out in the larger school environment. And then I will help the student to identify people that might be able to write a better letter of recommendation for them than what I'm able to do. Good point. But what are high school counselors to do? They have to write recommendation letters. And that's more, that might be more specific to what your school district requires for you to do. But again, you're right, it could potentially be an ethical dilemma, but if it's something that is part of your role or how you support your students, again, to acknowledge it and to consider what are the consequences if I write this letter of recommendation for a student, or if I choose not to, or I can't really say anything positive about the student because my experiences have not been where their behavior has been positive for me to speak on those aspects of the student's character. I'm a recent grad and just received my credential, but I was recently hired as a student support coordinator. That's not a school counseling position, but offers some social emotional supports for school-wide PBIS, positive behavior intervention services, something along those lines. But I do know what you're talking about, as well as individual and group services. I'm trying to figure out how to remain ethical in the services I provide while also sticking to my current job description. For instance, should I still have a confidentiality clause that I share with students and parents? So your role is for a student support coordinator, but it's not as a school counselor. So this is where I would refer you back to what your job description says that you should be doing as a student support coordinator. And also to look, what department does your role fall under? School District of Philadelphia just created a fairly new position. It's a behavior support counselor. And I would say that new role, there are aspects of confidentiality that that behavior support counselor should implement in their role with students. They do fall under the same umbrella as we do as school counselors, but then also, what is your degree under? So what do the professional organizations say that you should do? Are you utilizing some type of ethical code? Did your degree as a school counselor, was that necessary in order for you to get this job? So there are different elements that you might want to consider. And then also, if you do have malpractice insurance, this is something that you would be able to bounce off of them, and they would be able to more specifically talk about what your state says, maybe about your school district, and also ask someone in your school district too. It sounds like, you know, once you get in there, you'll probably know a little bit more about what your role would be as a student support coordinator.
All right, awesome. Well, thank you, Dr. Green. We're a little over time, so I'm going to try to wrap up. But thank you all for coming. It was awesome, some excellent information. I know I learned quite a bit about things I need to work on to make sure I'm aware of what's happening in my district. And again, Dr. Green, if you could drop your email address in the chat box, that would be awesome for those who are interested in keeping in contact with you. I want to thank you all again for attending our day 2 of the Professional School Council of Color conference. We're excited that you participated. We'll probably do a survey after all 3 days